I'm joined here on set by John Fortier, the Director of Democracy Project at the Bipartisan Policy Center here in Washington, D.C. Good to see you again. Big night yesterday for politics. We're going to try to break it down on what it means to sort of Americans and the rest of the world as well. Let me start with this. Are you surprised by what the GOP and the Republicans did yesterday?
I'm not surprised by the direction. I expected Republicans to do well and maybe even take the Senate, but the magnitude of their victory was bigger than most people expected, and it's going to give them a bit of more momentum going into the next 2 years.
For those who like to speculate about the 2016 presidential run, does what happened yesterday mean anything? Should we read anything into that and what we might expect in 2016, or is it two completely different types of people who turn out to vote?
I don't think we should read too much. We do have a different electorate in 2016, and we'll have different conditions on the ground. I think one thing, though, is that Republicans are still a pretty competitive party, and some think they could never win another presidential election. I think they'll at least be competitive in 2016, but it doesn't really tell us what's going to happen based on 2014.
In the minutes that some of the polls were closing on the East Coast, I already heard leadership on the Republican Party already talking about things they would do, and one of them was to try to bring back all this offshore money, a lot of them technology firms have around the world, to bring it back to the United States. And numbers I heard was between $1 and $2 trillion. They say that would help stimulate the economy. Is this something that could perhaps pick up some steam?
Well, I do think both parties agree that we need to fix our corporate tax code and maybe even have a little bit broader tax reform. That is one of the areas I think that they could work on together. I think many issues they have differences on, but on this, on trade, on some foreign policy issues, there might be some common ground between the president and Republicans in Congress.
Jessica talked about the XL pipeline. I'll throw in there Obamacare as well, domestic issues such as minimum wage. How has that landscape shifted? And I guess if you're sitting in Obama's chair, you must feel some pressure here that you're going to have to concede some of these issues.
Well, there's some pressure. I think you heard the president today say both some things that were conciliatory, wanting to work together on some things, but also that he's going to go his own way on some issues like immigration and take some actions by himself. So I think we're going to see a combination of some issues we don't agree on between the parties, as well as a few issues where we might be able to find some compromise. We do have divided government. It's hard to get things done between two parties who are disagreeing on many things.
For our audience around the world, usually the first thing they think about is what might change in terms of foreign policy. Now, we can debate about the current foreign policy, but I want to focus more towards the future. What do you think the shift is going to be, if there's going to be a shift?
Well, one thing is second-term presidents tend to spend more of their time in foreign policy. It's partly because they have a hard time working with Congress and getting things through. So I think you will see President Obama, even though things aren't going so well in foreign policy, spending more time. I think he would like to continue his talk about pivot to Asia and focusing on Asian issues. But I do think that many of our other foreign policy issues have come up higher on the priority list, are more on the front burner. And so it's going to be hard for him to do that. And on some things, he will get Republican support. I think support for more robust strategy towards ISIS is something that we could look for both parties agreeing on.
What about free trade agreements, for example? I mean, both sides have been vocal about why they want or don't want it, but let's talk about Asia specifically. We have the Trans-Pacific Partnership they're still working on right now, and you hear rumblings in the group. Does the Republican Congress, both in the House and Senate, mean anything to that debate?
I think it's one of the good stories here because Republicans are pro-free trade, and so have Democratic presidents been. But Democrats in Congress are much more protectionist. You have them representing districts that are representing unions or specific economic interests. So Republicans in Congress plus a Democratic president is a good formula for doing more on trade.
We were talking about this earlier in the newsroom about the economy, because there seems to be a disconnect. The poll numbers show that a vast majority of Americans feel like the country's headed in the wrong direction. Take any poll you want, they both basically say the same thing. But on our show, we talk about the stock market hitting all new highs, the unemployment rate going down. I mean, though the numbers are going in the right direction, why is it that Americans perhaps feel the way they do in a skeptical way, and why didn't the Democrats use that perhaps to their advantage?
Yeah, I think the Obama administration is wondering the same thing. Shouldn't they have done better? Isn't the economy really starting to kick in?
You would think he would take credit for that.
Absolutely. But I do think you see us coming out of a very difficult time, and there's still some skepticism among the American people of whether it's real, whether it's lasting, whether they're get the same types of jobs back. So if we have several more quarters of this, you may see some more optimism. But right now, the good news is still being treated as if it may be temporary. We're not out of the woods yet.
The next 18 to 24 months for the president, what does he want the outcome to be 2 years from now when he gets on Air Force One for the last time? What does he want the legacy to be, you think?
Well, I think he'll want to make some deals with the Republicans on some things like trade and taxes. But really, for a president to do something dramatic, it will be in the foreign policy realm. It's somewhere where he does not have to seek Congress's help. So I think the president would like to see his work with Iran work out, to the Middle East stabilize. These are big goals and hard to achieve. But I think if he focused his attention on foreign policy, those are the kinds of results he'd like to see.
He will have his hands full. John, thank you very much. Good to see you.